Hey everyone, welcome back to Admix for another episode of Giving the Game Away. And today we're going to talk about 5 more psychology tricks to get your users to play your game and spend more money. I'm excited to see what you have in store for us today.
This is one of my favorite topics. I studied psychology. I'm a big fan of it. Its influence is literally everything we do, and it's often either a weapon for good or bad, and monetization is such a weird middle ground. I find it really fascinating. Obviously, free-to-play games are a huge part of using psychology to make people spend more money because they kind of have to in order to make a profit. Obviously, some games take it further than others. And we spoke about the morals of it last time, didn't we? I think I remember you saying
a little bit,
yeah, about it being a sort of necessary evil, but you've just got to put your players first.
Yeah, I think some of this stuff is not necessarily bad, right? It's just playing on what people like and their emotional triggers almost to make decisions. So of course, everything can always be abused. And this is, I think, what we discussed last time. The idea here is not to trick the players at all. It's just to leverage the state in which they are, and sometimes direct them or incentivize them to make the right decisions.
Yeah, or to just guide them down a decisional path one way or another. And that's I find it tricky because the very first psychology trick we're going to talk about is the Skinner box, which we touched on in idle games. We'll go over it again now. I'll quickly go over it now before I ask your opinion on something. So Skinner boxes are named after B.F. Skinner, who was a behavioral psychologist, huge name in the field, following on from the work of Pavlov and operant and conditioning, associative conditioning. B.F. Skinner was all about reinforcing behaviors through understanding how behaviors are reinforced on a psychological basis. So he put rats in a box, thus the Skinner box, and when the rats pressed a switch, food would appear, and the rats started to associate the food with the switch. So they'd keep pressing the switch, keep getting food. But they kept pressing that switch even when the food stopped coming or came at irregular intervals. And now we use the term Skinner box to refer to anything that rewards people for doing repetitive actions with infrequent results. And this is often a negative term because essentially this is behavioral addiction. Slot machines are the best example. It's something you do over and over again with infrequent results, but you are just addicted to pulling the lever. And games have never really taken it that far, to my knowledge. But things like idle games really rely on the Skinner box design methodology to hook players in. And this is where I think it's teetering on the edge of worrying use of psychology. I think you could definitely weaponize this, which I'm sure some apps have done. I haven't really got any examples, but this is a dangerous one to me. Does this worry you, Sam?
Well, I mean, there's definitely been examples of, especially targeting younger kids, where you can really play on some of the psychologies by asking them to take actions. For example, if you don't click here, your panda friend is going to die, or some terrible things like this that we're trying to push young kids into buying power-ups. And I think Apple has cracked down on a lot of this because a lot of these kids were actually playing on their parents' devices and they were just pressing play. And on the App Store, if your card is already linked, it's really seamless to play, right? No need to put your PIN. And so obviously that was terrible abuse. I think that those companies have been prosecuted actually because it's fraud. But yeah, as you said, right? It's almost like a dial. As how much do you want to tune it? And this company employs psychologists that are really able to measure everything and try different things. I guess the best example of this are these social casinos, for example, where they really understand what makes user tick, and they have different variations of different slot machines that would have more frequent payouts for newbies. That if you're not a gambler, what you like is to see that you win often, but win little. If you're an actual hardcore gambler, what they're looking after is infrequent win but big wins. And so they can change the profile of these machines, different returns, and then just see how, throw millions of users at it, and then just see how people behave, and then just keep the models that generate the most money. So it's fascinating. And with the internet, of course, you can immediately get access to a focus group of millions of users on your website.
Yeah, it's a whole other conversation, but you just reminded me of the fact that these slot machine apps and even some bingo apps, crazily enough, I see adverts for them on TV all the time, which is a really interesting user acquisition channel for a mobile game, essentially. Usually you'd see games like this flipping between advertising in other apps or digitally advertising. It really goes to show that this audience aren't necessarily gamers. They definitely fall into the whole accidental gamer subcategory that we talk about so often.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And CPI for casino games, in terms of like if you run ads against them, they are pretty expensive. So maybe for those big companies that already have a brand like Slotomania or others, doing a bit of branding on TV is a great way to capture some of these users who maybe used to like actually going into the casino and now they have to play it on their phone. But anyway, that's a separate discussion.
Whole other thing. Yeah, okay, let's move on to the second one, because a lot of the psychology tricks this week actually feed into each other. So the Skinner box is all about behavioral addiction and doing the same thing over and over again because your brain is just demanding that fix of a reward. The second trick is the sunk cost fallacy, and games use this all the time. The sunk cost fallacy affects everyone in everything. It's based on the idea that humans are not rational creatures. We don't objectively summarize data in our heads. We make emotional judgments based on what came before. What came before? Everything in the past. So if someone, if you're playing a betting game, and the game is to guess which will happen if you flip a coin, heads or tails, and heads comes up like 4 times in a row, you're going to be leaning towards tails because the odds are so against 5 heads coming in a row that your brain will just be like, the safe option is tails. The answer is there is no safe option. It's always going to be a 50-50 thing because that's the nature of probability and statistics. But your brain can't calculate that. Games invest you to a point just through other mechanics. Maybe it's a Skinner box mechanic, maybe it's something else. And when you reach a certain threshold, and this will vary based on your personality in the game, you just don't want to stop because you've already put so much time in. The most famous example of this would be in games like World of Warcraft or Diablo, where people have sunk thousands of hours. And at the end of it, when they quit, they'll tell you, I played so much, I felt like I couldn't stop. I put so much time into it. That's exactly the sunk cost fallacy. On mobile, you have stuff like Candy Crush Saga. The fact that it's called Saga tells you everything. The game eases you in to a few levels, and then you don't really want to stop because you keep going. It never ends. And by the time you're at like level 300, you're like, well, I'm at 300. I might as well go for 400. It's very interesting. Candy Crush Saga was part of this really big experimental phase at King, where they were testing various design methodologies back in the early days of mobile, when it was when web and mobile were sort of playing around with each other. There was a game called Bubble Witch Saga, which had a similar thing. It was Candy Crush, which was popular. They combined the long, endless format of Bubble Witch Saga and the addictive gameplay of Candy Crush, and it became this incredible engagement engine that is still going today. It's very, very powerful, and it's also one of the major reasons that, as I said before, whales stick in a game. So obviously Diablo and World of Warcraft, they had their own whales, people who spent a lot of money on the game over a long period of time. Mobile has them in a very different way, but it's still sunk cost fallacy.
And how does that compare with this black hat mechanic that we discussed previously, which was the fear of missing out. So, and we talked about Farmville, I think, the example, right, where you know, they try to force you into staying in the game, otherwise your crops might die or something like that. Would you qualify that also as a sunk cost fallacies? Like, you know, you've invested so much time that you don't want to let it go, or how do you differentiate the two? Because they seem quite closely linked in my head.
They are very closely linked. The Farmville one is especially closely linked because, yeah, you've put so much work into making this beautiful farm. You don't want your crops to die. The interesting distinction, though, is when you introduce the social elements. Farmville obviously had that social element where people could see your farm and you could trade resources and stuff like that. You didn't, in a sense, you felt like you were being watched when you were farming and when you let your crops die. There was a sort of social judgment or perceived social judgment, which I found really interesting. I guess the social pressure part of it makes it even stronger. And Candy Crush Saga does have that. You don't really want to leave something that all of your friends are still playing, especially with the trading mechanics and the saving mechanics in that. The social pressure and the sunk cost sort of go hand in hand as to why people get addicted to games like World of Warcraft and Diablo, and especially mobile games like Candy Crush Saga. They are different, but they overlap so much. That's a Venn diagram that looks almost like a circle, you know?
Yeah. And I think as part of this diagram, actually, another mechanic is called endowment, I believe, which is kind of like the beginning of the process. So I think if my memory is correct, is the more you feel like you've done something yourself, the more you want to complete it. And that's like, you know, IKEA furniture, for example. You value that work more because you've spent time doing it. And a lot of games, like, they would make you build your avatar very early in the game so that you already kind of feel committed to it and you don't really want to let it go. So that I feel like would also be quite close and probably the third circle in the Venn diagram.
It really is. I mean, we've sort of shoehorned in another psychological trick there. Endowment is also the major thing that made Gardenscape such a huge success, and Matching to Mansions, I think, because suddenly it's basically the format is the same as all the other Match 3 games, but now you've got this, like, you're making choices, you're designing this mansion or garden. You have put yourself into it. You are endowed in it. So why would you stop? It's now the game is now part of you. It's very interesting.
Yeah, and it makes you value it more as well. There's this experiment where if someone say like you want to buy a cup and you just present you a random set of cups, you would maybe say, okay, I want to pay $5 for this one. But if someone gives you the cup up front, you're going to tend to sell it for, like, say, $10. So because you own it, even if you didn't pay for it, just because someone gave it to you and you say it's mine, you will tend to value it more. It's just fascinating stuff.
It really is. Very relevant to the mobile space. I know we're trying to keep these episodes shorter. We've got three tricks left, and we've added.
Well, technically we covered 3 already, but not the 3 that you had in mind.
That's fine. So we'll be a bit quicker over these ones. So scarcity is the next one. Humans place a lot of value on an object when there's not much of that object left. That's why precious gems like emeralds and diamonds are considered valuable, even though they are just rocks essentially. Diamonds especially. Diamonds are perceived to have, for there not to be many of them, thus we put value on them. But we make them. They're not scarce at all. In mobile games, this is really important through limited time offers, and you see this all the time. Like, act now for this deal on a bundle of gems, or it'll be gone forever. You don't want to miss out. And there's 2 elements to that. There's the social proof, being like, if it's low stock, which is weird in a mobile game, I know, then it must be popular. And then it's lost aversion, because you don't want to miss out on something. We've spoken about this before. Humans hate missing out on things. And this is both saying you've got pressure to do this. It's running out. Time is scarce. This is a popular thing. Just do it. What have you got to lose apart from literal money? Very, very
It's funny that this is obviously totally engineered, right? Because it's a digital item. There's no scarcity by definition. It's limitless. So compared to like real, items like diamonds, this is actually scarce. There's a real rationale behind it, but in this case, it's just totally engineered by the game developers, which is really trying to find the right tune, right? You don't want to make it too scarce, but you still want to make it, attractive to people. So again, another fascinating and really, really hard to get it right.
It is, yeah. I mean, just think of all of the times you've ignored that timer. But it is really powerful. They're trying to make it so you don't think about how not scarce it actually is by making the timer short. They want you to make an impulse decision, because then, you've spent the money. You might regret it, and that's very bad monetization design, by the way, making your players regret something. But it is a way of getting profit fast. Those players probably won't stick around. Their lifetime value will be garbage. But sure, you've made $1 today. It's a tricky one. It's a really tricky one.
Yeah, I was looking at my phone because I remember that game is Score Hero. It's a football game, and they have constant offers like that. And because it's literally all the time, it's not scarce at all, right? You know that you can come back in 10 minutes, the offer will still be there. You can almost see the counter resetting every time the offer expires, which totally stops this effect that you might be missing out. So you can't abuse that, because of course if you do it too much, then it's obviously not scarce. So it has to be really well thought out.
The deal has to mean something for sure. Okay, in the interest of time, we'll skip ahead as well. So the fourth trick, fifth now, I guess, trick is called fun pain. And this is actually a term coined by Roger Dickey of Zynga fame. He is describing a situation where a player is put into a situation that they don't enjoy and given the option of spending money to get out of that situation. It's broader than loss aversion. This is the design practice of adding in pain points in order to monetize them. So say you've got very limited inventory space, you can present a purchase option for more inventory. That's actually probably a good use of it, because you're selling convenience. Whereas you could be selling power in an online game where everyone else seems more powerful than you. That's a serious inconvenience. The game comes up with a pop-up being like, double your damage output for half an hour. Just spend money. This is another ethically really tricky one for me, because there are definitely good examples, like, selling conveniences like inventory space. But it's also where a lot of pay to win comes from. And I'm not sure I agree with pay to win. It makes a game less fun to me as a player, at least. What's your opinion, Sam?
I mean, this one is just really funny, right? If you imagine a user who is having a good time in real life, he decides to play a game, and it's so annoying that he's paying his way out. It's like, then maybe you should not play at all.
Yeah, no, right.
It's insane if you think about it. And it's the same with some games that put a ton of adverts inside the game, and then their top in-app purchase is the one that removes the ads, for example. So it's like, is it really thought with the user in mind, or some designs are clearly made to extract as much money as possible, right? Which is, I guess, fair enough as a game studio, but this one, as you said, is really borderline, I think, because putting extra friction in the process to make people press buy, it's I think it's as close as it gets to being on the dark side of the mechanics.
It really is. It very much is. I mean, that's probably one for the listeners to make up their own minds on, but there's a right way and a wrong way to do it. I think it's always going to be leaning towards the scary end of that spectrum.
Most of the one we discussed today, actually, if you think about it, they kind of black hat, right? There's not much, good creativity / motivation. In fact, I think we could discuss that in another episode, but it's most of these tricks are kind of like short term, and generally they appeal to the black hat, meaning appeal to our negative emotions, the fear of missing out, the loss aversion, and all of that, more than appealing to our need to socialize or be creative, for example. So it would be interesting to find maybe another set of tricks like this that appeal to the positive side. I don't know if there are any.
I think there are probably some. I think there's a lot of crossover between our motivation episode, but we should definitely do another list of 5 tricks because you're absolutely right. This is like the black hat episode.
Yeah.
And speaking of which, our last trick is actually, surprise, another version of endowed progress. So earlier we spoke about endowed progress in the sense of your personal attachment to something because you generated it, because you created it. That's the good version of endowed progress. And that is the success engine of things like Minecraft and matching and mansion and stuff like that. The bad side of endowed progress is when you basically trick people into thinking that they've got progress or that they've had an influence on something when they absolutely haven't. The best example of that would be Fortnite's daily quest system. Fortnite gives you a bunch of quests, and they'll often be things like get X amount of kills or generate X amount of money or whatever. And you see this in so many games with battle pass systems. The tricky part is where Fortnite will, the way that Fortnite is designed and the way these quests are designed, they're trying to get you to accidentally make progress on those things. Because once you've made a little bit of progress, your brain just snaps into this, like, I started, why won't I finish? I might as well play another game. And that stumbles into high engagement, which stumbles into high pay, especially when spending money will help you complete that quest faster. A lot of pay-to-win mobile games do this. It's a tricky one because it's sort of tricking a player. The worst version of this, I can imagine, I've never seen this actually done, is where you generate those daily quests based on what a player does. So you give regular daily quests. The player plays a game, tries to complete those quests, and then you generate extra quests for that day based on what the player did, and almost like if the player accidentally, if the player accidentally captured like 4 flags, give them a quest to capture 5. It's sort of being one step ahead of them. Yeah,
right.
I've never seen it done, or at least I've never realized that it's been done. But that would be the most exploitative version of it. This is a tricky one too, because endowed progress is more of an engagement mechanic than a monetization mechanic. But the aim is always to keep you in the game, to keep you spending money. Fortnite is a very, very probably morally good version of it, maybe, because they're still tricking you, but they're not quite as mean about it, if that makes sense.
Well, I guess tricking you to spend more time on something and tricking you to spend money on something is not on the same level.
Yeah.
Because at the end of the day, your attention is monetized by mainly advertisers, not in Fortnite, but like generally on the internet, right? So it's not the end user that is paying for it. But it is a form of trickery, right? At the end of the day, it's and I think when we mean trickery here is not necessarily a negative. It's more kind of finding the thing that makes you tick, even if you don't really realize what it is, right? Reverse engineering your brain effectively.
Yeah, and you're always going to be able to use that for good and for bad. We said this in our previous episode and article before, and it's probably a great note to end on. There are really 2 majorly important things that your game has to have in order to use any of these tricks well. And first of all, that's moderation, which we've spoken about throughout this. You can't make a player feel tricked or pushed to their limits with frustration. That's why we said this at the time, but that's why fun pain is such a weird one, because players will stop playing. They'll regret spending money and they'll just give up. So you have to really be moderate and be careful with using these in any form. That's just good design practice. The second thing is quality. If your game isn't fun to play to start with, then these tricks might boost engagement for a day at most, but you're not going to see any major return really. you still need to make a good game. That should always be the priority. Create something fun and then push it as far as it can go through these tricks. Don't try and start from the top down, I guess.
Yeah, no, for sure. And the focus is always on creating engagement organically through the gameplay, and then this stuff can come later.
Exactly. The tricks are really effective, but at the end of the day, a lot of the people we speak to are game developers, and you should be developing games, making fun experiences. Keep doing the things that brought you into this industry in the first place. And most of the time, that's probably not money, because being an indie dev is hard.
Yeah, there are better ways, or easier way probably to make money, but it's seeing people play your game, and especially when you can measure things like this, it's extremely rewarding. So fascinating stuff. Thanks you so much, Ian.
My pleasure.
Hope that you guys enjoyed it. Actually, if you guys implement any of those tricks or have or those mechanics already, please comment. We would love to have a look at it. Guys, follow us everywhere on our social at Admix Play, and see you next week for another episode.